now. Okay, we are live. Everything is recorded now. So thank you everyone for joining us today to our let me close the YouTube, sorry. Welcome to our first day of thesis at SCI-Arc, the GRAD thesis 2020. I'm very actually happy to be here. I'm very happy to have our guests today, especially like this year that has been a very difficult, complicated, and particular semester. Our students did their entire thesis remotely. And I think they really tried to give their best. So I'm very excited to see their final work. I'm very happy to have here all our jury, and not because I don't want to do my job, but just because I want to basically have your Zoom thumbs like popping up. I would like you to ask you to kind of like introduce yourself, just say a couple of sentences and say who you are. And then we can start with our students. So from the jury, I don't know who wants to start. Do I have to pick someone? Do I have to pick? I'm gonna start with Russell.
Follow the grid.
Okay, then great, Martin, please.
Oh, hi, Marty Summers. I'm an associate professor at the University of Kentucky. I founded Plus Some Studio about 6 years ago. And prior to that, I worked for 10 years at Morphosis in LA, where I worked with Georgina for a number of years.
Thank you, Martin. Florencia? I mean, you're an advisor, but you're also part of the jury at this point.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know if I have to say an introduction. I only want to say thank you guys for coming and for joining us. You know, as you know, I don't know if you know how many reviews we have. Like we have 20 groups, I think, with 80 students. So we try to make these groups like very intimate. So, Ramiro. So it's like it's really kind of a nice conversation. And you know, I mean, we give plenty of time for the students to present and then have feedback from everybody. That's my introduction.
Thank you,
yeah.
Florence.
I don't think I need to say who I am.
And thank you so much for all your work this semester. Penelope Dean.
Hello, I'm associate professor at UIC in Chicago. And I also edit and founded the magazine Flat Out. And I write criticism, theory, history. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Russell?
Hi, everyone. I'm on the design studio faculty at SCI-Arc and in the history and theory department as well. And I'm an architect here in LA.
Thank you. Ramiro?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ramiro Diaz-Granados. I'm faculty at SCI-Arc, and I went to graduate school with Georgina, and Penelope was there as well. So just get some street cred right off the bat there.
We like that.
And I'm an architectural designer here in LA.
Great. Thank you so much. Georgina?
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Georgina Huljich. I am an associate professor at UCLA and the principal at Patterns with Marcelo Spina, classmate of Ramiro from the MR2 program at UCLA, at same time at school with Penelope, used to work with Martin at Morphosis, and I studied with Flor in the University of Rosario in Argentina.
This is too close.
This is, I mean, how much more familiar. Russell, I don't remember, maybe in my previous life, we were, I don't know, like share some kind of environment, but we are very good friends with Russell too. So thanks for having me. I'm super excited to see the work.
Thank you. Thank you to be part of that. Lucy.
Hello. I don't know you, Georgina, but maybe we met in a past life, just so I don't feel left out.
Well, you look like a student. That's why you look so young. That's why I kind of.
It's my special Zoom filter. I have this special. Just notice my background's back to front, which makes a lot of sense. I'm an artist. I call myself a science fiction artist and body architect. I'm a visiting professor at SCI-Arc. We're about to start our fall studio, vertical studio. I teach a seminar. I have, I work in biotechnology, artificial intelligence, edible technology, film, photography, and installation.
Great, thank you so much. So again, welcome to everybody. And I think we can start with our first presentation. And we have Sherry Cow presenting. Hi, Sherry. Please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry. May I share my screen to start my presentation? Hi, my name is Sherry. My thesis topic is the Botanic Imprint, the revolvedness of architecture, which is focusing on the synthesis between revolving botanic species and engraving and embossing to make a mark on the body of architecture. Here I treat plants as philosophical being. The role of the architect is to design the revolving process. In order to achieve a specific futuristic revolvence effects, to work more like a landscape architect, one could imagine the scenario that revolvence is going to take place, and that architects are now to design the botanic imprint on part of the architecture details. The botanic imprint is an artistic and aesthetics representation of growing plants on the architecture. The botanic imprint as a phenomenal imaginary of a utopian world allowed the rest of human-made infrastructure to be imprinted by nature. Here above are the concept collages I made during the thesis prep. By continuing doing the research on concept of botanic imprint and the wellness of architecture, I was amazed by Giovanni Piranesi's drawing and how enchanted and detailed the room and background atmosphere he created, and recorded the elegancy of the wellness of the architecture elements. The World Expo inside the Crystal Palace was a centralized collection showing the power of colonization. The Crystal Palace is seemingly like a terrarium that brings beautiful things together. Also, the Winter Garden inside the small Hermitage brought the same idea of preserving the natural beauty. Here's the Java Center in New York as an initial site of the concept miniature model. The reason why I choose New York is that the city is the most urbanized and willing to have an escape from the post-industrialized urban state and to embrace the natural imprint. There are also the interior concept assemblation for the botanic imprint for Java Center. I customized and arranged the succulents. Here is the miniature concept model for the projects. I customized and arranged the succulents and choose the glass terrarium, which is 40-inch tall. And the miniature model would like to depict the idea of how plants cohabited and imprinted inside the glass terrarium-like architecture. When continued doing the research, as we could see from Byrne and Hale Becher's collection of these infrastructures, especially in some post-industrial cities such as New York, Detroit, even in the downtown Los Angeles, close to our school, there are a lot of warehouses and factories are left behind, left unused. And one way to reuse them to direct this is to direct the small business or exhibition inside the building, such as the row, without changing the interior so much. A quite remarkable way of renovating the industrial building is the method of botanic imprint. The Expo 2000 Dutch Pavilion by MVRDB brought the nature inside the building. It seems like nature is growing in the middle of the building. An urban farming company, the Vertical Harvest, built a vertical greenhouse in downtown Westbrook. The cost-effective hydroponic farms not only a way of urban landscape model, but brought meaningful and consistent employment for people with physical disabilities. Also, there will have a consumer market inside. And the method of Botanic Imprint on architecture are a vivifying idea of renovated abandoned industrial infrastructure. Here I choose a steel structured industrial warehouse and start to renovate and design the botanic botanics and landscapes. Inside the warehouse, here the plants and flowers are plants and arranged in the first and second floors. The vertical curved walls worked as future vertical harvest containers. The third floor is a more natural state of mimicking the real nature and more like an observation deck for the visitors in the communities. It could be function as the 3 levels natural embraced vertical farming, landscaping for leisure, which is also an indoor oxygen zone. To insert natural imprint in the abandoned industrial infrastructure, it's a 3D and a cubic interpretation from the collages I made at the beginning, and it brought potential vivifying impact and around the post-industrial district. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.
Sherry, maybe you can put the images as a grid. I think that'd be very helpful.
Images into...
You know, in PowerPoint, you can put them all in a grid.
Oh, yes.
Sherry,
And then you can maximize your screen.
Is it the... Sorry. Oh.
I think it's below in PowerPoint. No, I mean, I don't see your PowerPoint. Yeah, like that. But I think in view, if you go to view to the upper left, go to view, the little button next to the grid. No, not in there, but in the navigation. If you go lower below the red button on the left side, yeah, there, that. Press that and just put light table, table.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think that people can say they can go to a special slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sherry, I wanted to say the first series of images, I felt like I was looking at a book. It felt like they're really beautiful imagery. And it felt very tactile. And I think what's interesting for me is we're all online, we're all working through screen, and yet what you've made is very, like, I want to touch it. I can almost feel the paper of which it's been printed on. And I think that's so beautiful. And it made me think about, you know, one thing near the end of the project is that it feels very feminine. It's like a very feminine architectural point of view. And I wonder what would happen if it was even more wild and irregular and wilding. The word wilding came in because it's very beautiful and contained. But what happens if I don't know, you send an algorithm, and I don't know if you can do this, you send an algorithm through your program to like mess things up, or you let it render for 3 days and it grows by itself because it felt sort of very pruned and curated, which I think is super beautiful. And one final thing was also, I liked the concept model of you making it, you know, this is obviously in your home, and then scaling that up to the size of a warehouse. And while we are all kind of at home redefining what a home is, somehow this project for me is almost like a clue into how we live with nature on the inside within our own kind of micro habitats.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I could add something to that that I think is interesting in the project. You know, two of the things you're contrasting are the drawings of Piranesi, which are trying to capture something in a state of ruin. And in the pavilion where it's, you know, literally stacked. No, I think Lucy's idea about wilding is really interesting because it, you know, what's that? Oh, you're losing me.
Yeah, your boss is cutting out.
It's because Ramiro and I are sharing the internet. It's terrible. Anyway,
it's Ramiro's fault.
Yeah, I always blame him. But anyway, if I'm still being heard, the thing I've always found interesting about Piranesi is he goes from the activity of documenting sort of the fact of what's occurring with entropy, to then when he makes the drawings of the Cartieri, it's a kind of projective language of architecture. It moves from the idea of looking backwards to looking forward. And I was thinking what Lucy was talking about wilding it and thinking about how you can begin to push the natural and the architectural together would maybe be a sort of next place for the project to go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Russell.
I agree. It's very beautiful, beautifully represented project. I have a question about the scale of the plants. So in the first part of the presentation, the plants are almost represented as pot plants or kind of at the scale of the individual plant. And then by the time you get to the project, the plant has scaled up to the scale of a park almost. And when I was looking at the later project, I was also thinking about Emilio Ambas's work from the 70s and 80s where he produces bucolic landscapes inside big warehouses, or even James Wines from Sight importing plants into the interior but to produce sort of park-like environments. So could you talk a little bit about the jump from say the plant as a sort of small thing to then the composition of plants as a park?
I think at first the collages I made is more like how I see the wellness going to happen, like in an imaginary way. And it seems like a rewarding process, but it actually a kind of artistic and aesthetic way, and more artificial way of wellness. And I think for the final like project and design I made, it's more like a phenomenal and more natural and more inhabitable for these plants to growing. And maybe here plants is more like a tool of how architect can see that wellness is actually happened in a real industrial like abandoned building.
I have a question. Is what we're seeing, like all the vegetation, is it representing like natural vegetation? Like, is that what we're supposed to be looking at it? So the green stuff is grass, the trees, like these would be actual trees, plants, flowers in an organic sense. Is that how we're supposed to read it?
Yes, I think so. And I think here, like, we could see it from like it's a physically growing, like all the plants is physically growing on this ground. But what I'm also trying to impose is that it's kind of a aesthetics way of renovating and use some typology of greenhouse or botanic imprint to execute.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I asked that because I think there's something about the representational technique that if you were to imagine like if this was an aesthetic game, then how can you undermine the actual representation of nature through perhaps proposing that some of this becomes artificially manufactured objects, right? So I think, for example, like Roxy Payne's tree series, he makes these trees out of reflect a chrome or reflective metal. So they branch and look like trees without leaves, but they're all completely fabricated. If you were to imagine inserting fabricated, artificially fabricated, natural looking items that would be integrated with stuff that would grow in there, and you're playing a couple of games, both aesthetically but also temporally, because one won't change the way that the others changes, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is what's really at stake. Is it the kind of aesthetic game, or is it the tectonic game, right? Because now you introduce this cage where you domesticate nature. You still keep the binary relationship between domesticating nature, or what we read as nature, through technology, right? So what would be more interesting is to break that binary down, and where we don't know what's natural, what's technological, what's artificial, and it becomes a much more an engaging kind of environment. And that's when I think it's still maybe on the MBRDB side of the Hanover Pavilion, where you can read the kind of dichotomy of here's architecture, here's tectonics, here's nature. But how might this get broken down in that sense could be an interesting game to play.
Ramiro, I think to that point, sorry, you guys, if you look at slide number 2, Sherwin, maybe you can put it. I thought that these collages are where the thesis, resides, where the plant gets inside of the structure. Somehow she got these collages, and like I think they had a power that when you try to represent it in other mediums, we just go around that. But I thought that I just wanted to point that out, because you see the rebar, and is it inside of the concrete? Is it outside of the concrete? Is it like growing inside of the structure? So I always thought that these are really beautiful collages, which they're 3D, Sherry, no? I mean, they're kind of, you're kind of treating them in 3D. They're not just 2D found images. She constructed them. So I just wanted to point that out to Ramiro's point. This is definitely the answer.
Well, yeah, and I think, I mean, with that, one can almost read parts of this as becoming graphic, like wallpaper, so, which is also part of the history of representing nature pictorially on an interior. So yeah, if this was taken as a diagram, you say, okay, how do I take this as a diagram to begin to tease out architecturally in a full 3-dimensional environmental way? That would be fascinating.
I would pick up on that just a little bit for the question of what's at stake, and say maybe, because that's what I was trying to figure out as the presentation progressed. And the description of your first series of images as kind of tactile and book-like, and the desire to kind of reach out and grab those. I think there's something about the combination of the concrete and the grayness, and also the weathered concrete. So there's also back to the temporal that Ramiro was describing. There's something in the architecture that goes beyond just the architecture as a form, and goes into something about those Piranesian drawings about kind of history or time, or the contrast between this thing that appears kind of dull and lifeless and the kind of emergence of landscape within that environment. So I'm thinking all these kind of post-human movies where people are gone from the city, you know, after the zombies take over, and the nature kind of reemerges in those environments. And so I'm not sure if that's what you're proposing, because then when you see the presentation in the end, the architecture is so neutral that it becomes just plates for landscape, as opposed to, I think what Florencia was pointing out in that first one is somehow there's an interaction between the two. It's just a new terrarium, right, at a different scale, as opposed to thinking about the warehouses as kind of having some impact on that.
I mean, that's where I think that I agree with Florencia. The first images are more compelling, but for me, the plants are the architecture, in the way the plants are architecture for someone like Ishigami. So I think that the second half of the project is very nostalgic. It's obvious in its references, but it presumes that the plants are independent of the architecture or some kind of supplement to the architectural form. Whereas I think the promise in that image number 2 is that the plant itself is structural, not in a tectonic way, but in an organizational way. And so, and I was also thinking when I first saw it, it's extremely contemporary, given all of the recent articles in the New York Times about pot plants and plant parents, and, you know, this surge in people buying pot plants during COVID-19. I mean, that they're almost like pets or friends. So I was really hoping the project would go that way, and become kind of more fictional and domestic in relation to the individual, not in relation to the interior.
Yeah, I think that it's still staging, the architecture is still staging nature and or a kind of domesticated nature, the way the MBRDV pavilion stages it. And I think the thesis is so interesting because, and I do agree that the first images are quite beautiful and maybe start to get at it, is that they, you know, they're speaking to the idea that the relationship between the built form in nature is changing, and it's not this kind of one thing housing or staging another thing. And it was making me think of just a story on the radio this morning about Japanese people reoccupying the area around the Fukushima nuclear power plant, and it talking about how the animals that live there, because they're feeding on the vegetation, are all super radioactive, and they're filled with radioactivity. And I was thinking that's a kind of maybe idea about the project where the two things are collapsing together, that there's no longer this kind of separation between, you know, radioactivity, human-made sort of disaster, and the nature that sort of surrounds and occupies it. And that now you see these things kind of producing some third thing. I'm trying to stay away from Martin's images of zombies, but nevertheless, there's something there about when the project, in other words, what's projective about your one doing. It could be aesthetic, as Ramiro is describing. It could be an idea about rewilding it. It could really challenge the architectural qualities of the thing. Right now, they're still a little bit kind of complementary.
And maybe if, I mean, just like trying to put this in a context that, I mean, hasn't necessarily been discussed, but I think this, I mean, like one of the things that I feel it's extremely interesting in this project, and I think Lucy brought it up somehow in her comment, is that, I mean, it presents an ambiguity of scale where, I mean, it's not clear, and I think it wants to be unclear in terms of what is a scale and what is the actual manifestation or the material manifestation of what, I know, what this project is in terms of, I mean, I think it can be as synthetic or as natural as it wants to be. I think if there is one scale that maybe is more prominent when looking at it within the cage, that is almost, I mean, it becomes almost an escape from the current apocalyptic environment that we are living in, and it's almost like an utopian window that contrasts the current dystopia, because I mean, it's almost undeniable that, that we are living or we are going through that right now. And in a way, maybe the references to Piranesi, I mean, if talking about its material quality that actually would make it, again, it could be as natural or as synthetic, depending on the scale and the context that is being placed, it almost, I mean, it relates to those references as a matter of an abundance of line work, or as an abundance of fields and materials and matter. I mean, as a way to almost like promote an exaggerated or amplified version of what that context is. And that's why, I mean, when I see some of the initial collages, that's what I see. I see, I mean, something that is so dense that, that can also be three-dimensional. It can also be wallpaper. And that's where maybe the idea of the wallpaper may add another level of ambiguity to the project, because it is, I mean, it could be completely flat. So it could be a space that is not, that you cannot inhabit, but still brings the narrative of like wanting to move away from a dystopic environment and into a much more maybe friendly or happy utopia. So I mean, I really like how the project is standing somewhere there. I mean, it's not very clear about that, but I think it promotes, I mean, if it promotes a narrative or a reading that could actually move into multiple directions. And I really appreciate that for a thesis project, because it doesn't have to necessarily answer all the questions, but also propose some new questions that might be developed in sharing your future career.
Well, it's funny, it makes me think an alternative Dutch example, which is more contemporary perhaps. Have you seen these Dutch agricultural farm buildings? So apparently Holland is like the #2 exporter of produce in the world because of the efficiency of these things. So they're hyper rationalized, technologically advanced grow houses essentially. And so nature has been extremely domesticated, or let's say disciplined according to these technologies. And so you no longer get any picturesque rolling hills, and it's just like produce laid out in grids and rows like agricultural farms, but against the background of the hyper rational modern shed building with all the kind of infrastructure that weaves throughout, right? So that would be like the other extreme of foregoing any kind of pictorial or picturesque ideas.
Yeah.
There's also one architect that you can look at. He's French. He's actually both an architect and a gardener. His name is Gilles Clement. And he wrote recently actually this book, which is called The Manifesto of the Third Landscape. And he's describing in this book what this third landscape is, which is basically a sort of like an intentional landscape, which is the result, something that we called before, like the synthetic landscape, which is like a result of a mix of nature and man-made objects. And also is an intentional landscape in a way that it's not tamed, it's not framed by the human activity. And he has done this project in Lille, in France, in the park Henri Matisse, where he built a giant concrete mountain in the park, and then he let the nature growing on top of it. So he basically constructed just the main structure, the main architecture, and then he let the nature doing its own job and being completely open and free, where like people can't go up there. They only go sometimes with a ladder to get down the toys or like balls that get on top from the kids. playing in the park, but no other activity happens there. And it's pretty like interesting to look at as a reference, because it's like a sort of like wilderness, or like it sort of becomes like an intentional landscape built on top of a structure that is intentional within a framework, which is like a park. So kind of all of those layers starts to come together. So I think that could be maybe someone that you want to look at, especially like looking at those very beautiful pictures that you have in the first slide, like your collages.
Yeah, thank you.
Just one last thought about the NVRDV precedent. I mean, that building was so rough when it was built and very crude. I mean, it's a diagram, and what your project does is upgrade it. You kind of produce this upgrade that's better than the original in terms of its resolution. I mean, I find that interesting, and maybe it should be even more higher resolution. In other words, that you exacerbate the precision of the plants, you make the flaws disappear, you kind of sort of erase the trace of the crude original by making the new one so high definition and so precise and so clean and so neat. I mean, that could be a very interesting way to escape from the kind of burden of the precedent, which is so well known, it's so well published. I mean, it was also polemical in '95 because it was the first time we saw a building as a section, I think, and also imagined a ground as multiple. I think the trick today is how can you produce a polemic for something that already existed? And I think maybe you're onto something with the high resolution imagery. And, you know, I don't know how to propose what that upgrade, further upgrade would be, but I think it's a very interesting kind of historical problem, like of how to escape the original, not by changing the form, but by changing the visual resolution of the image itself.
Thank you.
That makes me think about the word substrate, that some of the last images where you see the floors of the warehouse, whether actually the wilderness, where those floors became earth or dirt or moisture or humidity, worms. And so there is no definition between what is solid and not living to what is living, where what we see now is solid becomes living, and how would that change the question or the premise for the project?
Thank you, Lucy.
Is there any final comment?
One last idea on that is that if, you know, the MBRDV building was crude and low resolution and its moves were really big, right? Like there was one idea per floor. Maybe the way to amplify the resolution is to have many like smaller parts in each level. In other words, you multiply all the content per level. And that's a way to kind of multiply the resolution.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
Yeah, it's a nice thought. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say a few things. Thank you, everybody. I think that Sherry, you got amazing comments. I Googled everything that they said and put it in the chat. So just copy the chat and save it as a note. But I think, I mean, I just wanted to go through a few of the comments. I think that, I mean, I wonder, because the images that you see, the collages we have in Thesis, we have Thesis prep. We have in January, we start with prep, and then the world collapsed, and then we are here, just to say, what happened in those few months. Sherry went back home, and so on. And so, so I think that those collages, they really start to kind of define incredible things. And the point that Penelope was saying, and I put that New York Times, it's true that the New York Times bombard us with a lot for like how to make your own garden. But I think that domesticity, which is like, if you see image number 23, Sherry, if you just click that, when we did this exhibition, we did an exhibition, tried to make something physical inside. You'll see the other students will show you their miniature, and we hire a photographer. This is just to give you a heads up of what we did in the summer. We stayed in Zoom, but then we tried to do some things to be kind of closer. And so, so what we did is that we hired a photographer. All the students sent the model or brought a model, and Sherry, she just sent it through Amazon. She sent these models through Amazon, so she could like bridge the kind of divide of the world. And I thought that, I think this goes back to Penelope's note on, maybe it was more about Amazon and less about, more about buying the stuff, and rather than creating a landscape, like I think the final project goes a little bit too much into the kind of new farming practices, the idea of the green garden, like you have all those stuff. But I think that how can you preserve nature? And I think to Georgina's point, and when you look at the images of San Francisco today, and then you see the red skies, and it's mostly red, not because the fire is in the sky, but it's because the fog, not the fog, but the dust of the fire is canceling two color hues on the sky. So you only see red, but you don't have blue. And so that's why, so it's incredible how the air changes the color of the sky. And that's why we have these apocalyptic images. So in the end, indoors air is better than, so I think there's something that is true, that in what is the domestic space, might be that domestic, the plants growing inside, Sherry, like you had before, and I love those images that Gilles Clement, Angelica, I think that they're fantastic, how you start to look at that, the kind of that nature starts to happen through, I mean, always everybody uses the example of the highland, but that became much earlier within those things, how you find nature, that rather than you discover nature rather than you manicure it or you garden it and so on.
Thank you, Florencia.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you so much. I think we can then move to our next presentation. We have Blake Mincer. Hi, Blake. Okay, now I can hear you.
Yeah, sure. I can share a link to the YouTube video, but I'll also play it over Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Is there audio, Blake?
Yeah. Can you not hear the audio?
No, I think you have to, when you share the screen, you have to click that option to share audio as well.
Blake, it's exactly on the share screen window, and it's in the lower left. When you share the screen.
Share computer sound, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Lafayette Park in the Westlake District of Los Angeles was founded in 1899 by Clara R. Shadow as she donated 35 acres of land to the city of Los Angeles. In return, she requested that land be turned into a park. The name Lafayette was intended to commemorate the American Revolutionary War officer, Marquis de Lafayette. With the rapid growth of Los Angeles, Lafayette Park began to host various recreational and civic programs. Today, the existing site of Lafayette Park currently hosts civic programs such as a Superior Court, Public Library, Recreational Center, as well as an Arts Center. The new redevelopment of Lafayette Park, in Los Angeles, aims to reconceive the notion of an urban park. The project utilizes ideas of terrain sampling to create an artificial recreation of nature. As Los Angeles dwells in a desert biome, the selection of desert terrain has been appropriated. Using a terrain as an urban park provides a revision to the preconceived experience of urban parks, as it bestows users with a perceptive placement into the artificial terrain. The scale of the sample terrain is designed to be 100 feet equals 1 mile. This scalar play grants opportunities to develop hyper-intensified qualities inherent of the terrain, while providing an immersive user experience. The existing program has been excavated within the pichet of the sample terrain. A standard 400-meter track tethers the programs together throughout the site, carving tunnels into the pichet. Moments of artificial ruptures occur where the program and the sampled terrain collide, which then formulates architectural intervention within the sampled terrain. Areas of crop topping slice the sampled terrain, establishing contours as legible figures. Artificial strata erosion has led to the fabrication of the parking structure. Where the boundary of the site slices the sampled terrain, it articulates a stark silhouette outline which then becomes the facade to the structure. As
Do you still wanna share your screen?
I can stop.
No, it's
Oh,
I
sure.
just don't know what was going on because it was frozen, at least on my screen.
Maybe you should cue the jury if you're done, Blake.
Oh yeah, I'm finished with the presentation.
Do you have maybe a couple of images to keep on the screen?
I guess
Or the video, I mean,
yeah, I'll just run through
whatever you
video.
have.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a question about the edge of the site where you kind of take the knife and slice it. the first frames we see like a black, maybe we see like the black finish. And then there's another shot where the camera creeps around and we don't see the black, we see the reflection of the sun through the black. Can you talk about the high contrast between the contours of the nature and the roughness versus the super polished edge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the super polished edge versus the contours of the terrain, the sample terrain, give a more a paradoxical relationship between like a manufactured item versus the sampled terrain. And the idea was to kind of develop a silhouette that could resemble either a mountain or some other type of landscape, and then use that to reflect the city. By using the reflective black glass.
So the idea is that it's almost not visible. It's meant to not be visible. It's meant to be a mirror for the rest of the environment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like I leaned in when you transplanted from Baja, Mexico onto this site, because it's almost alien, the colors, and then you have this like circuitry, almost like the vein that connects everything, this like running track. So yeah, I'm kind of like trying to process what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling, because for me it's really unusual, and I like that I feel almost alienated in the beginning. It's like a refreshing feeling. For me, I'm also interested in the way that someone would present, and you've used a kind of computer animated female voiceover. As a filmmaker, those decisions are really important when you're trying to tell a story. So yeah, I guess I was also sort of looking into why you chose that voiceover. I think it's super interesting, and I'm still sort of taking it in as a concept, as imagery, and as a film.
I completely agree with Lucy. I'm still feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but in a good way. And I like that, because I'm not sure if I'm being totally ignorant, if I'm not getting it, or if it's, I don't know. I mean, it's very strange. The images are absolutely astonishing. And so, I mean, kind of picking up on other things that Lucy was saying, the voiceover, I see it as, I mean, this is the ultimate artificial intelligence kind of presentation, where you remove yourself from the responsibility of authorship. So now, I mean, you press, I mean, you hit it enter, and so there you are. You can claim credits, as you can also eliminate any kind of responsibility if something went wrong, which I think is super smart, right? So, and also the fact that, being specific to the site, then at a pedestrian level or at an urban level, you are muting the site, and you are just bringing the city like entirely to the side because of the mere reflection of what's, going on around it. But what happens with Google Earth? I mean, like now Google Earth has become a way, an instrument of surveillance that is even more prominent, more accurate than anything that you might perceive from the street. So Google Earth is objective. Any perception from the street is subjective. So I think, there is this dichotomy that has to do with, objectivity versus subjectivity, that also I think can be related to an idea of, kind of artificial intelligence and the way that you can immerse yourself as being the full author of the project. So I think just like placing the project within those two realms, and then with the mastery that you have acquired in terms of manipulating form, because we can argue that this is just the result of manipulating a territory. This is just, I'm not sure exactly what techniques you use, but I'm sure there was some photogrammetry. Some techniques where, you are actually rebuilding from an existing territory. But then you have to make decisions on that. So, you are still the designer and you are the author of this, but I think you have done it in such a sophisticated way that even though, I would maybe argue that I would love to see maybe a higher level of resolution. I would like to understand what this Google Earth image is giving me. I think it's also, very strategic and in a smart way to have kept it at that level, because it opens up, it opens up a dialogue that is still rather ambiguous. So, but I guess, maybe I would still like you to embed your hands in the dirt, because there might, some of these images might also, it's kind of like a moving, like soily territory. And then maybe, I know, like what or how can you start to bring some of these to an architectural level? Somebody might argue that this is purely architectural, and I would maybe say so, but somebody might argue otherwise. So how do you answer? How do you answer these two very opposite kind of contingencies in the project?
Yeah.
Well, I think the fact that, go ahead, Blake.
Oh, you can, okay. I would say like this is, I would say more architectural, because it's more of like an idea of sampling and then taking that sample and then using ideas of manipulation. And it's also like meticulous in the idea of scaling. So it's like more intensified idea of a park. And it's more about like delivering an intense user experience and re-envisioning what a park is in an urban setting. And then the ways that the program manipulates the actual sampled surface. I would say this is like purely more on the architectural end rather than the other side.
I was just going to add on to what Georgina's saying, because I think they're really interesting observations, and I'm glad to hear you respond to it in that way, because the fact that one can't quite tell if it's a constructed architectural object, so it's super architectural, or whether it's sampled terrain and therefore it's found and placed, we can see both things in it simultaneously. I think that that's to its credit, because it's straddling those two territories. You can imagine that all urban parks at some level are contrived and designed and placed, and so they have references to other places, other parks. So the idea of sampling from Baja makes perfect sense to me in that kind of lineage. But then when I look at the project, the silhouette of the thing and that kind of deep black glass, if I can read it that way, on one hand, yes, it's reflecting the city and therefore it's sort of trying to recede. And the other hand, it has a kind of deep space to it that the reading of the silhouette is anything but natural. It's a different kind of sort of almost urban event to read the silhouette of a skyline or a natural form. And what strikes me about the site and the choice of the site is a lot of those things are already there. The courthouse has the most bizarre landscape around it, with the sort of stone, supports reaching up into this reflective glass building from the 60s or 70s. I don't know when it was made. And when I look at the project, on one hand, you see it as a sort of artificial sampled terrain, and then you see the edges of this kind of black amoeba on the sort of lower left of center, that it has a sort of sharp edge that starts to suggest that it's constructed like the Matterhorn at Disneyland or something. In other words, it's super thin there, and then it has this roadway sort of going through it. And I think all of these qualities are sort of contributing to that read of where you can't quite tell if it's a kind of constructed nature or a natural architecture in a sort of faux way. I wanted to add one question. The buildings in the project that are on the site, are they enveloped in this thing?
What was that?
Are the buildings on the site that are existing, are they inside of the piece?
Yeah, they're inside the terrain. So it's the exact same program, just dispersed throughout this sample terrain.
I guess it just prompts a curiosity about what the interior of the Matterhorn looks like.
I think there's an opportunity, though. I think the question of whether or not it was a constructed landscape or whether or not, or I think the discussion about kind of how the architecture affects the landscape. It seems like I personally wouldn't walk away from the decision making that's required in that relationship. So the discussion of authorship and the desire for kind of an artificial intelligence that drives the design, I would look more at where are the moments where the architecture or the program or say the space between the program and what appears to be a very thin shell, almost like it's literally a draped copy of the landscape down, as opposed to the landscape actually having a quality of thickness and mass, which I think is Russell's comment a little bit about the Matterhorn, right? Is it appears to be very paper thin at moments that then just shrouds a kind of almost normative programmatic architectural existence underneath. And then there's this gap between that and the skin that I'm not quite sure what happens between there, but it seems like in the kind of remixing or sampling of those two, that somewhere in there would be a little more friction between the kind of program that occupies that space below and the actual surface, so that you would kind of prioritize that reading or misreading of natural versus man-made or artificial or artificially intelligence driven, right? Or your decision making within a finer grain of architecture, so that you could conflate those two even more. Because to me, it seems like it's almost all artificial intelligence driven. And then because of that, I think Georgina's reading of kind of you stepping back from it, that's for sure one approach. For me, I would ask for a more convoluted approach out of that, so that rather than everywhere being an extreme landscape, there might be moments where the landscape is less extreme, but the architecture starts to, or the program starts to emerge in a more specific way, so that now I don't see it as covering program. I see it as the two existing together in a really strange way. And I think the moment is your topography, like the three-dimensionalization of the topo line that actually becomes almost a modernist building, is a really weird kind of inversion, right? And I think that's the moment for me where it gets interesting in a really odd way,
absolutely.
Right? Like I hate it and I love it at the same time. And because of that, I don't know how to deal with it.
But that's exactly that moment, Marty, is where the skeptical that would say, well, how is this different from the mountain, the Harry Potter mountain in Universal Studios, right? I mean, that's what a skeptical would say. But that mountain lacks that very strange cut and relationship to a facade that is extremely artificial, yet begins to propose the idea that what's coming on the other side, it's also artificial, but needs to deal with an architectural detail that otherwise doesn't have. So, I mean, I completely agree with everything. And maybe now, I mean, also my position now it gets also like closer to Marty's in terms of, I mean, actually, I do want to see, I mean, I'm not skeptical and I believe that this is not that Universal Studios object, but then how can you actually prove it to the one that doesn't believe it just by the imagery that you are proposing? You don't have to answer. I mean, I think this is just a comment in terms of, I mean, like the whole idea that artificial doesn't mean that, I mean, there is not a one-to-one translation between the natural and the artificial. there is a transformation, there is a material difference in terms of grain, in terms of, I mean, assembly, in terms of, I mean, I would love to see the structure of this, right? Which is not necessarily the wireframe of that geometry. Then that's when I would argue that goes back to Universal Studios.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we talked about a lot, is how, you know, the danger of this slipping into kitsch, like the Matterhorn, where I read that as the kind of the domestication of the sublime, you know, of the natural sublime, let's say. And to me, it has a lot to do with the fact that this is an image form project. And what that means is it's operating on the image as well as other things like tectonics and things like that. But how the image, as initially starting off as representation, how the manipulation of the image begins to, or has a potential to move this out of, away from kitsch and towards what I would refer to as a post-sublime aesthetic or quality.
What I find most interesting about the project is that you call it a park, but there's no green. So it's not a nice park. And I give that as a compliment. And it's not a community park or a politically correct park. It's a park that's more like Alcatraz, it's rock. And I love that idea of a park as a rock. I think that's really fantastic. Having said that, though, I wonder if you could be more economical with some of your formal moves. For example, I wonder why you decide to articulate the running track. Like, why not make that part of the rock in the same color? In other words, like, think of the park as a plan and only deal with it as a building in elevation, which a lot of people have already commented on. So we would only see one sharp edge on the side. And that's where you realize that there's an interior, but everything else on its surface is simply rock, like the first, one of the first images that you showed. It just feels like it's a collage of parts rather than teasing out the image of a park from a found image.
I guess the question of this track also brings up other things. So you've imposed this really extreme landscape within this urban setting, but then why not take the kind of qualities of park or the performance requirements of park in certain ways and start to reimagine the landscape within those terms? So like you've gone through the effort to place this extreme condition in a very unusual context. Well, then why would I go to the park to run on a normative track? Right? I can run in the city, right, but I sure as hell can't climb a sandy, mountain 2 blocks from here. And so then the whole idea of park and activity and even the idea of kind of occupying space becomes really strange because I cannot do this anywhere else. And so it could allow you to kind of rethink what the architectural implications of this idea is beyond the imagery, right? To actually get into the, I think, as Georgina was talking about, the kind of material of this thing, and not see it as an image, as a surface, but actually as having mass and weight to it and qualities to it, where I would want to run in the sandy area. And clearly you could climb certain parts of this, but that'd be a very different experience for an urban park.
Martin,
I think
sorry, you go.
Lucy, well, okay, I'll make it quick. I think one of the observations about the running track that is interesting as opposed to the kind of spiraling ramp, which seems like it, as Martin, I think, already observed, is that it sort of unravels the contour into a surface. The running track suggests that you're always at a remove from the landscape, so you're viewing it in a way that you're in it, but you're not participating in it. And I think the project's more successful when it starts to challenge this sampled landscape and deals with it architecturally. That's why I think the section cut at the perimeter that reveals the silhouette is that it suddenly goes from being a kind of surface landscape sample to something that has section, dimension, and it's architectural. And I think more things like that, where I'm echoing a little what's already been said, where they're collapsed together, but they're not turning to gray or beige, that they're becoming sort of one thing's transforming the other. I think those are the moves that are taking you somewhere with it. Lucy, please.
Thanks, Russell. I really like the running track. I don't know if it's my childhood athletics training, but I totally agree with both what Penelope and Martin have said about. I love the concept of a park not being green, it being rock. You know, I'm inside my living room and it's just getting more orange and more dark and more apocalyptic, and yet I don't want to put a light on because I want to feel connected to what is going on outside right now. Many of us are here in LA, and I love the idea of going and running on a surface that is not like the athletics track that is, you know, in the city and you don't have to drive an hour to get there. However, for me, this, I don't know why, but it makes it feel more bodily. Maybe it's the color. I don't know why. And you talked about kind of sampling, and I like this idea of like grafting, and my work is very much, and my interests are very much about the body, and someone talked about the space between. So, yeah, I guess I just wanted to say there's something about that track. I would rather that be the contrast between the rest of the city, the terrain, than the spiral or the glass for me. For whatever reason, I like the track. Sorry.
Well, I think that brings up a really interesting point in terms of the use of conventions in this type of project. So in a way, you do need the convention. I don't think that, I mean, everything has to be rediscovered. So now, I mean, there is a new track. I mean, actually for people that practice track and field, or I don't know, I mean, is this for running or this is for cars? This is for running?
Yeah, it's for running.
Okay, so see how much I like exercise, that I cannot even recognize what one of these things are. But where, I mean, then the use of I mean, that is what it is. So as much as I agree with you, Russell, in terms of, I mean, maybe beginning to think about new ways or innovative ways to maybe, I don't know, experience some aspects of the park that might not be necessarily familiar in the way that we might do it with other parks. But then I think it's conventions what ultimately brings a sense of reality to the project, even though then what I would argue, I'm not sure if just like throwing the track in there and then, I mean, just intersecting the landscape as it is maybe, I know, the only way to solve it. Because I think ultimately the landscape has to also be affected by that. Not that they have to become a hybrid. I don't believe in the hybrid. I do like the idea of the contrast, but not just as a collage. I don't think this doesn't want to be a collage. This needs at least moments of normative, I mean, it needs moments of, I think normative architecture that has to deal with conventions as they are. However, they also have to affect, or they have to challenge and produce some tension within the context or the landscape that is being deployed.
I wonder though, if you could treat the track in a similar way as you treat the sampling of the landscape. And so the track, we're all talking about it as a kind of iconic image. It's the thing that we can latch onto that starts to play within the landscape as something that's identifiable. But then if you were to actually take the track and map the track onto the terrain, so part of the track is normative, but then the track becomes a Google glitched, stretched Earth across that terrain, it starts to add this other question of, you know, performance versus image. And so part of it actually functions as track and part of it becomes image. And therefore it starts to resonate with the landscape in a very different way, and with the proposition overall that you're playing with this idea of image, and image becoming a kind of architectural, this is the concept, right? It's the image resampled becoming the architecture. And I think if you could start to maybe take parts of the program and resample those and take them out of kind of the functional program and produce those as a kind of image, you might get a little more resonance between the architectural kind of spaces and the representation of those spaces.
I guess my problem with the track is it's too easy to use. If you go to the effort of making a park as a rock or dunes or whatever, it's not friendly, it's not green, it's not a place for picnics. Why make it easy to use? Like, I think the interesting thing would be to make it a park that has to be discovered, and it's not easy to discover it. And that would mean maybe not, like, you have to discover the track. It's not something that's legible. I mean, maybe the use of the park is about making it becomes legible as you use it, the same way that the image making is producing a kind of legibility through the sampling. I don't know. I don't think there should be anything nice about this park. That for me is what's polemical about it. The not nice park.
One more thing about the track. What happens for me is that because of its elevation, the track, because of this like plexiglass or glass fence, the athlete becomes the performer of this rocky, unfriendly stage-like park that you're kind of running across and inside, and people would look at you. So there is like an element of theatre that is interesting. And Blake, I don't know if that was ever thought about, or by putting it there, you were trying for the scale of the body to perform in a certain way. I guess that's a question, you know, did you want it to become a performance or to stand out? Because we're all talking about it.
Yeah, I think I wanted it to like be more predominant throughout the site, and have like with what you said about the plexiglass, that was intentional to like have the users from either the street or people at the park could like see the activity going on throughout the space. So yeah, that was part of the intention.
But I think what Martin said was a way into this. It was a really good suggestion, and I think it's what he's observing is an extension of a lot of the logic you're already deploying in the project. So I think it was summed up quite well. And it's really about how do you extend that idea of sampled image, and then through technique producing something that is architectural or begins to challenge all the conventions that Georgina is talking about. I mean, I'm trying to get away from the competing theme parks of Disneyland versus Universal Studios, and because I think the project does manage to escape those associations. I think the reason we're talking about the track is because you could see it as something that is conventional, collage, iconic, it's placed, and it's differencing with the landscape, whether you're moving through an interior or you're at a kind of remove, is producing that juxtaposition again, that it seems like the project's trying to challenge, not in the way to make them all the same, but to see how one thing begins to kind of transform the normative quality of the other. So the suggestion that the park is, the track is difficult doesn't mean that you're sort of running on a trail. It means that it has the kind of form of that, but there's something that's been challenged about it within the image making sampling of the thing. I think if it remains so autonomous, I'm sorry to go back to the Disneyland thing, but it's like riding the train through Dinosaur Land. You know, you can look at it, but you can't touch it. And so the whole thing's a facsimile. And I think there's something incredibly tactile about what you're making, and the architectural part of it, it really does want to move into maybe what the interior of the building is, but I know that that's a whole other kind of thesis in that regard.
Any final comment? I mean, we have time, but
Like, are you done with this project, or are you like just getting started?
Yeah, I would like to revisit this. I think I could definitely take these comments and like much more progress this. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely look at this after, like maybe in a month or so.
not from tomorrow.
No, definitely not tomorrow. No.
But definitely, usually thesis is something that you come back to it, or the thesis itself is going to come back to you.
Right.
I think it's really exciting as a project in terms of the kind of technology and the way you're looking at technology within how to produce an architectural space. And I think the best thing about a thesis is not that you've solved anything, it's that it haunts you for 10 to 15 years after you've completed it. And I hope that the project leaves you enough, which I think it does, to tackle, that you're going to think about this long and hard for the next decade as how do these technologies allow us to reimagine architecture? And I think right at the moment there's the technology is overwhelming maybe certain decisions that you could make within the problem. And I think once you can harness how you make the decisions within that technology, it'll take a whole jump, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do you, jury members, how do you feel? Do you want to take 5 to 10 minutes break, or do you want to jump right into the next presentations?
We take a break?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We can reconvene at 3:40. Does it work for you, Angie?
Yeah, 5 minutes is 5 minutes is fine. I was just planning on this small break. Just
okay. We have time, so we can sit 10 minutes. Hopefully, I mean everyone is gonna come back.
That sounds great.
oh yeah, no,
okay.
Yeah, we can sit quietly for 1 minute. Yeah.
Okay, then.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Bye.
See you in a bit.
Hey, Angelica.
Hi, Andrew.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you doing?
Great.
Ready for the final
Absolutely.
stretch?
Yeah.
Cool.
We're
Where are
waiting
you?
here.
Are you in LA?
I'm in Silver Lake. Tell me if you like. Tell me if you like the yellow fire sky behind me. Well, you can't tell. Never mind.
Can't really tell.
Yeah.
It gets
Yeah.
kind of like white and washed out, but it's pretty yellow here too.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, this morning I woke up and like the air was smelling so much like smoke. It was insane.
But, you know, I hadn't really smelled smoke yet here in Silver Lake for this latest fire, but today I did.
Yeah, same. I'm close to downtown, and this morning was, oh my god, something is catching on fire.
I'm only supposed to smell this when I'm camping.
Scary, yeah. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but when we started the call, there was a earthquake. At least here was okay. not please, not now.
No. I'm too close to Thesis to feel an earthquake right now.
It's like an internal earthquake.
Yes. I hope the sharing screen and everything goes okay. What I'd like to do is include a link to the YouTube. I didn't know. I'm afraid there might be a lag problem through Zoom, but I don't know.
It seems going pretty well. I mean,
yeah.
I have the also the YouTube channel open on the other screen, and it's running pretty smooth. So
I'm gonna just share my screen. I have two computers going right now, so I've never done that before, but I think it'll be fine.
Sounds good.
I'm closing all windows except my Thesis. Oh, where was the sound button? Okay.
So once you start sharing your screen, it comes at the bottom on the left.
I'm going to do a test share.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm before break guy. Wow, this is great. Okay, one more time. Where is it exactly? Because now I have the share screen up.
So right before you click share, in the window where you have all the options of the screen that you can share.
I see.
At the bottom left, you have the option for the audio.
Good deal.
If it's an issue, you can send me the link and I can also share for you.
No, I was just making sure.
Okay, so everybody's back. Great. Andrew, if you feel ready, please.
I sure am.
Okay, the stage is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Stone, MR2. I'm going to share my screen.
Through a lens of reality TV and real estate ads, we are led to believe the value of home is only as good as its imageability, a notion we commonly refer to as curb appeal. Historically, curb appeal represents an individuality in the form of disciplined property. Today, curb appeal most commonly applies to means of increasing a home's market value and reduces architecture into consumable signs of desire and status. Curbed appeal proposes a new strategy for the arrested developments that are colloquially referred to as zombie subdivisions. By denying the totality of the typical signs in curb appeal, curbed appeal allows architecture to reclaim agency in how it informs today's evolved market and society. Curbed appeal denies the presentation of the house to the street. By eliminating the frontal zone that typically stages the house, curbed appeal denies the conventional indifference to sight and proposes a variety of nested programs whose privacy and accessibility can be integrated into the rewilded sites. Rather than a tectonic that merely circumscribes or conceals its parts, curbed appeal offers a redistribution of the conventional Type 5 construction and conjures a tectonic whose parts and assemblies occur both tethered and autonomous. This open-tuned tectonic allows the home to absorb and occupy conditions of the site. Curbed appeal eliminates the status of the vehicle by integrating the garage into the varying ground condition of each individual structure, rejecting the one-size-fits-all driveway for a more subtle accessibility. Curbed appeal factors into the immediate relationship of the neighborhood typology, particularly regarding the issues of visual privacy. Consequence of height and orientation play into their relationship both in plan and in section, allowing for applied logic in perpetuity in order to retain the implications of the subdivided plot. As the tectonic incorporates a vast domain, and orientation plays into maintaining a visual shared wilderness in the zombie subdivision, each house maintains a sense of its personal domain. In short, curbed appeal inverts the capitalist-driven conventions of curb appeal in order to create a new sense of domain and maintain the visually shared wilderness of the zombie subdivision.
I'm going to share my Miro board now. Okay. I'm going to include a link in the chat so you can watch it on your own. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'll just go. Ooh. I'm just dropping this image.
But can you also keep running it without sound?
Of course.
Or, okay.
Yes. I'll have it in the mirror running with some, next to some pictures. And also, I included a link to the Miro board as well as the YouTube, I believe. Yes. If you want to click around yourself. Is everybody able to see everything kind of comprehensively?
Well, I guess I'll start with it. Also a quick question. Are you proposing to replace each of these, each of these houses?
No, I referred to the zombie subdivision, which is a kind of arrested development subdivision. There's no houses on the subdivision. It's just the roads and the curb. It's typical of certain subdivisions around the United States. So I picked this as my site because they're kind of rewilded sites. So you have the decision to either clear cut or not. And okay. That kind of began, how do you start denying curb appeal? And that was kind of a good site to start.
So you need a completely naked and new terrain to operate. You can't use
the zombies up. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, just think of it as like maybe in a forest environment. In this case, it happens to be in a subdivided neighborhood, and that was kind of the interest. It's kind of neighborhood mixed with a vast wildness on the account of just this arrested development over the years. So it's actually particularly for this site, particularly for a grid, but then an actual rewilded landscape. So because the idea is that the project's not totally ex-urban or outside, it's part of the fabric of any suburb. I think of it as from a kind of suburban standpoint.
Thanks. I understand that, but it's still, there's nothing on it. There's just the subdivision.
No, nothing on it. No, yeah, there's nothing on it.
Lots.
Exactly. Yeah, totally bare besides the trees. Sorry, when you said bare, I kind of thought. Yeah.
Sorry, it's my accent.
No, it's fine.
So
actually, see this image right here. This is what they kind of look like. This is the typical plot right here. So you see how this one person clear cut the site in order to create a typical curb appeal site in this kind of rewild. So you have this kind of infinite grid and infinite forest kind of at the same time, which kind of makes it pretty interesting.
Okay, so
yes.
I guess something just maybe to get the conversation going very quickly. But I'm very interested in, or I really appreciate that you are taking on this theme, which is, especially nowadays with, how suburbia is being characterized and how apparently liberals are about to destroy suburbia, and well, I don't have to keep going about that. So, I like it aesthetically. I like it. I like what you are proposing in terms of the, almost like beginning to disintegrate or like virtually disintegrating the grid or making it maybe a little bit more blurry than what it is now. But then on the other hand, I have I'm conflicted about the fact that there's still a grid. There is still a very defined grid. So, maybe the skeptical, which is, I'm bringing again that character that was part of the previous project too, might argue that this is just like a fancy, it's more intelligent than the typology of suburbia as we know it now. However, it's not necessarily changing so radically the way that the block and that the grid behave in what we know as to be operating on a suburban grid.
Well, I was, I wanted to keep it on the terms of the subdivision, and those plots are already laid out kind of legally. So now it became an exercise. How do you kind of actually retain that plot, retain that lot, because that is the place you particularly own, and the fact that it's rewilded by these trees do kind of erase that line. How do you kind of build that back in this case, with this kind of artificial weave of plastic plants that kind of create a color associated with every particular domain, so I really wanted to hold on to everybody's individual plot, but visually when you're experiencing it, you just experience a vastness.
Yeah, maybe can you have the animation running? I think it's a.
Sorry, I didn't loop it.
Yeah, now it's okay. So no, thanks for that. Yeah, I guess that's a fair point, and because then it's like by looking at the plan maybe is is the part of the project that maybe you need to disclose the least, because it's the one that maybe goes back to conventions, which maybe talking again about the idea of the normative and the idea of conventions, as we were talking about before. I completely appreciate the fact that, the grid is a grid, the plot is a plot. I cannot touch my neighbor's property. And so it's really about the play, the perception that you get at the pedestrian level. So it's like I want to see more of that, and that's why I'm interested in you, because it is there. And but then I'm wondering, like, what is the role of the interior within that play? Are you interested in also promoting a different kind of relationship to the neighbor, to your neighbors and the neighborhoods?
Absolutely.
Or how would you articulate that? Because it's also, I think it's I guess I'm hoping to hear like a very strong sentence that talks about what is it, that perception that you are aiming to have, why the layering, why the colors, why, how do you feel that is different than when you see the very isolated condition of one house next to the other?
Well, the idea was that we're denying curb appeal. We're not completely eliminating it. So it needed, I wanted it to retain, the project itself, retain kind of an everyday quality. The idea is to just destabilize it slightly, not completely eliminate it. So really, and into the program itself, the idea was, like I said in the video, it's not to simply circumscribe or conceal, something we get with typical type 5 constructions, just kind of gridded boxes, rooms. It's more that there's no real particular room. It's more a scale of space, where you might have more white space or more raw background space. So there's niches and there's openings. So you can kind of dial in privacy, not totally at the detail of like a particular. This is the bedroom. You're kind of just more playing with nested pieces of program, bigger and smaller, in order for it to integrate into because the tectonic kind of needs to absorb the forest around it, you know. Usually, typically houses are completely, based on the construction method, are completely indifferent to the site. So, you know, the program is to be knitted in the site. And there's, you have kind of more hidden spaces and exposed spaces. And the furniture is just kind of descriptive of the program more than any particular part of the house itself.
So they're open strokes of a brush. They're never enclosed figures that.
Absolutely. Okay. It was a matter of how much I manipulated the tectonic. At certain times, I would leave it more at a kind of global, you know, kind of more rectal, you know, I wouldn't manipulate the forms as much. This, as you see frontality right here, you see how they kind of go from the global form to very local form. Mm-hmm. And so the more or less I did that was kind of the more convoluted a space got, or the more just normative. So just play all these on.
Can you talk a little bit more about why the buildings look the way they do? Geometry, color, layers.
I wanted to use. When we started the thesis, you know, I really wanted to, you know, kind of have more of a, how do you work with a part, you know, or like the sensibility of a plane. So we're looking at something like the Schroeder house, you know, so I really wanted to maintain, you know, that plane quality, but, you know, kind of like the steel house, but maybe a little bit more augmented. And that's kind of what set the whole project up, just in terms of how I modeled everything. And then I just simply worked through stick framing. As you start to delaminate the type 5 construction, stick framing kind of became more of a kind of, I would make it colorful, and it you know, it just kind of, everything just kind of opens up. So it became kind of the canvas for this artificial material. So the stick frame kind of has now this identity or regalia kind of attached to it. And then when you go into the sheetrock of type 5 construction, that would just be kind of more white space. So you're manipulating those three things on those terms. And then the color of it just came from the drawings, the way I was working, kind of something that's totally abstract mixed with something much more literal, like the project itself. So it's almost like the projects could read like the drawing. The color is particularly abstract in order to distinguish from like the real raw nature of the site.
I'm asking because on the one hand, it seems like the urban idea is about making something disappear, or in your words, denying something. But on the other hand, the design of the building seemed to be making something become more conspicuous, right? Mm-hmm. It seems to operate in the reverse. So I'm trying to understand if that's intentional, if you want one thing, you know, like the plan to recede, but the building to appear as a figure. Mm-hmm. Well, or if the formal language is a means to destabilizing issues of front and back, car to house, entry, in other words, to produce a building in the round. So I'm just trying to figure out how if one's a means to an end or they're different ends.
I guess the way I'm understanding your question is that the idea is not that it totally gets lost into the nature. You know, the program or the tectonic doesn't become untethered in order to get lost. It was just in order for architecture to reclaim an agency and kind of how it can, you know, just on its own terms, you know, and that it really kind of more happens to fit in this type of kind of wild environment, because it's wild in itself, but in its own kind of architectural way. So it's not necessarily trying to relate to the site or anything like that. It just happens to kind of almost work in the same way, but, you know, kind of by working with everyday parts, you know, so it kind of now has a more raw kind of almost physics to it now that might confound the person a little bit. You can't quite capture, there's no imageability to it. You can't necessarily capture it in one frame. It's always denying or trying to pull away from any single vantage point.
But I think it's also, I mean, to Penelope's point or question, like in seeing the full animation now, like I read it as, you know, in the initial video clips of looking at the typical kind of subdivision tract, right, where you can see a clear house object and its construction method sitting on a piece of property with a front yard, backyard, side yards, all those things. That what yours is taking all of those things and redistributing them in an unruly way vertically. So now there could be side yards on the third level in this little corner. Backyard is now vertical, you know. So you get all these pockets of yards, but they're smaller. And so that's part of what produces privacy. It's almost like the entire lot of house and yards is now in this mass that is completely exploded, which now leaves the actual territory open to this wilderness, right? And so that's how I'm reading this. And so I think questions about, and I think you've answered Georgina's question rightly, right? Like you maintain the traditional parcel layout, and this is ownership in terms of legal means, but visually and materially, they've been kind of eradicated.
That's really helpful. Oh, sorry, Andrew.
No, please.
That's really helpful, Ramiro, and I think that's kind of incredible concept for a project. I would love to see that in some of the imagery, and maybe you need to zoom in a little bit more to some of those parts. So we see the suspended garden in the canopy, for example, or, you know, because I think that your views are, you have the bird's eye view and then you have this sort of street view, but those views aren't showing the kind of scrambled content of the project. I mean, what you've done is you've taken the suburban lot and you've scrambled it and all of its bits, and you've scrambled it three-dimensionally, if I understand Ramiro correctly, which is kind of amazing. So then I would have liked to have seen more scrambled views, because I think that would also help account for the formal vocabulary of the project.
Yeah, I was going to say that, if I could, that
yes, that's right.
The project seems like it holds on to some of the conventions of the subdivision because it begins with a kind of critique of what you're calling curb appeal, and that it's a thinly veiled diagram of a kind of profit margin for what sells. It's been reduced to a set of images, organizations that at some level are completely predictable, including how the furniture fits into the interior. And the idea that yours is unique is provided by, you know, the kind of thinnest facades of difference in order to promote the sense that uniqueness somehow is another sort of sales promotion pitch to increase the value of something. So the project seems like it has to reside still in that world in order to produce the critique. And at the same time, you're producing a different version of all the things that are familiar in the subdivision and the houses that occupy them. But as Penelope is describing it as a scramble, or the way Ramiro articulated is that, you know, if you were the real estate agent, you could point at it and say, the outdoor space is here, the side yard is here, the terrace is here. They're just not in the form that you know them. And so it's probably also at its most interesting when it still takes on all the conventional furnitures and furnishings that are in the space that are being sort of in an uncomfortable occupation now of this sort of scrambled syntax of a house. I mean, I find those moments interesting because they cause one to, as any good critique would do, to really reconsider what has become so familiar that we don't think about it any longer. And because it's predictable and without any kind of delight in it, so to speak. you know, but also in my head, I'm thinking about Tafuri saying that as soon as the Radical project is adopted, it will become the next sales brochure. So you might go back to being curb again.
Yeah, I would wonder about the, you know, curb appeal as an idea is, like you described, it's this kind of sellable. And in the conversation that's evolved in this review, it seems like you have to be closer to the thing that's sellable or knowable, and then produce those moments where now there's something else that's different, and that difference produce a value that then, as Russell was describing, it kind of critiques the things we take as valuable, right? So it's a value system. It's a projection of values that people are buying, and they've assumed that these values equal a better life, and we've kind of all adopted these norms. But relative to the what Ramiro said as a kind of recontextualizing all of the norms three-dimensionally, then I would wonder what are the new things that are showing up to where the side yard bathroom dining room condition is actually a much more valuable experience of home in this environment than the traditional version of that, right? Because Russell's comment just then of kind of the Tafuri, you know, how that becomes also co-opted. Is that the desire that eventually this becomes the new curb appeal? Or
Yes.
is it trying to find that kind of weird in between where it's just uncomfortable enough?
No, I mean, I'm trying to keep it comfortable enough. I'm trying to just, I think there's a new sensibility on the ground, and I'm just trying to give a project to that. I think that the houses today just don't almost solve a problem that we have. I'm not necessarily trying to give you some sort of theme ride or something. I think once you're there, you'd feel it to be quite normal. But it kind of have a typical quality to it over and over again that you say, hey, I want that, because I designed these and made these in a very particular way, and they kind of follow a very particular set of rules. So I think of it kind of, yes, as a product. I mean, because you can't, you know, the colors and everything are just very specific. You know, actually the only thing that changes are these synthetic flowers from part to part. So I think of it as, yeah, kind of drive it off the lot if you want. And, you know, I'm simply denying, I'm not eliminating.
That's kind of how I see the wild landscape though, right? Like I have a very tiny yard. I live in Kentucky. I have a very tiny yard. I hate doing landscape work.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, it's already here for you.
Yeah, and so
and the fact that you're cultivating, once you start cultivating and disciplining, that's when you start making your mark. You know, it's not your vehicle; it's then how you start disciplining, kind of your own. You kind of cultivate your house.
You still need to maintain it. So Marty's not gonna be happy either.
Yeah, I know.
Well, you know, I think in a way yeah.
Do the birds come with it too? The bird recordings?
It depends on what part of the country you're in.
Because you presented it as a film, this kind of, you know, the start of a TV show, we're flying over the city, and then you zoom in closer to the house of the main protagonist, and then you drive down the street and you're sort of seeing the neighbors. I think that for me, I was almost starting to see this through a kind of, I hope I don't offend you, like a Netflix fictional lens, less of an architectural lens, and what happens in here? What is the relationship between the neighbors, and does it change the dynamics of the way that we live? And I mean, from what I can hear, you see this as a product, almost as like a company or a brand that this could, you would like this to become a reality. And I don't know, I wonder whether as a storyteller, and we discussed yesterday in the lottery that storytelling is a kind of form of control, that you tell this story and you make it so provocative and so real that then you can roll out like an infomercial, not that it's an infomercial, but then you roll it out as a brand. So I think for me, I'm interested in the sensation of, Martin said, like the bathroom that is in the garden, and how that changes. You know, yesterday we also talked about how Generation Z are now the biggest population in the world. They take up 32%. They're anyone turning 8 this year up to the age of 23. This is 32% of the population, and I think that this is almost like a playground. It's breathing, and it's you know, you did this, it is like that. And so is this the kind of platform that Gen Zs need to live in to really be in charge of our future from a kind of Netflix treatment pitch doc point of view?
I see in a way, you're kind of, it's made a new type of advertising, more than the program itself or something. I really kind of, I guess what I'm saying is I definitely look at my friends around me or something that like to share. I didn't want to necessarily make this, or me and Ramiro, we didn't want to necessarily let it go to complete co-living. You know, it's almost, I don't know, I feel like the differences are so inherent in the project that you can still just put it on a plot. You don't need to change the plot. You don't need to change kind of the whole system of things. You can kind of do it from the inside, you know, so people feel that difference once they are in this house, but they don't necessarily feel like they're sharing the vastness with everybody. So we're simply kind of responding to maybe the new today's sensibilities. Perfected is perceived that way. Maybe it's not necessarily sold that way. The spaces aren't necessarily broken up that way, but you do kind of perceive or have a sense of difference when you're there. But it's important that we do know this is mine and that's yours to some degree, you know. So really,
no, sorry,
when it comes to the color, when it comes to the color and everything, I did not mean to make that fantastical. In fact, the nature or the visceral quality of the nature is so extreme that you need to build an artifice in to just regain a normality, or kind of a, you know, yeah, you know what I mean, and kind of like a Peterizing or something.
The other reading that came up in a previous review was the idea that this is like taking the cabin in the woods type and converting it into a subdivision, right? So you get multiples of these cabin in the woods right next to each other, which is also part of its strangeness, I would say.
You know, I thought about movie in there. I thought about that, you know, when you mentioned that, because I hope that, slide over here, that, you know, I think you do still see kind of maybe a part over an assembly, you know, so you kind of still see the CLT, you still see 90 degrees in places or something, you kind of still see the parts, you know, and I think maybe a log cabin is somewhere between part and whole. You kind of see the individual logs or something. So I don't know if that might have been part of it, that these all kind of have a consistency to them that's like the part that they're built, you know.
Well, it can't move too far away from the source in some regard, I guess is what you're saying. But
yeah,
you know, I was imagining the advertising campaign already, that, you know,
go ahead.
You can imagine housing which is designed where someone might claim benefit from efficiencies, like you can live in less space, but it's really efficient because it does these things, or this is a better use of land, you know, these kinds of arguments about optimization. And I think your argument for the advertising campaign would not be we do it better. You just say we make you do things differently. And
without
and,
noticing.
With maybe, or really noticing, at some moment it sort of dawns upon you that, yeah, I'm not doing this the same, or I have a different orientation to, the way my last 5 houses were. But the other thing I just wanted to maybe bring up is, I always enjoyed anecdotally listening to Frank Gehry describe his house, the one we all know, and the reaction of the neighbors, like, how could you do that in the neighborhood? And, his sort of redeploying the argument against him to say, well, you park your trailers and motorhomes in front of your house. Like, it's really no different. You just got to see it differently. And, there's something resonating about this project with that kind of an attitude, that it's a different way of seeing something that's become so reduced to the image of, commerce. And I think the project, trying to work at that. And I like that about it.
Can I also
Well, the Spiller House was a big reference.
Yeah. Can I also offer a kind of, well, I'll say it's a very personal reference because of my own interest in image and camouflage relative to kind of three-dimensional form. I don't think we can not talk about camouflage relative to this project in a very intensive way, where there's a direct contrast set up between kind of wild nature and curated man-made artificial nature, and the blurring of those distinctions, especially in that zone where we go through below and we go from this really wild site to all of a sudden the landscape is glowing. And so there's that then turns up three-dimensionally into the house. And then also you're critiquing a kind of normative domestic landscape while also trying to still provide a kind of normative quality of experience behind a facade of something that appears to be not normative. And so not only just then beyond that, if you just read it as an image, you're getting the kind of slashes and other things that you might see out of the razzle dazzle that is also hyper colored. And so it's breaking up the figure again, even though it's doing it kind of double. The geometry itself is trying to break up the figure while the patterning is just reinforcing the geometry. And so there's this really kind of strange condition of almost like the house is trying to disguise the normalness of the existence on the interior. And I wonder is that what you're really trying to do? Or are you trying to find a kind of strange interior too? And I guess that goes back to my prior question of that moment of seeing 3 things that don't belong together in this really unique way in this house. But it seems like you're trying to say, no, actually it's more normal than you think it is.
I'm saying that it's more normal than you think it is, because I think when we started to build color back into the kind of just raw CLT panels, it really did to me feel like it added a different layer of coherency. It wasn't just wackiness layered over top of wackiness. You kind of now start to see like a distinction between parts and things as well. So it was more that if kind of everything kind of maintains its own, there's a level of autonomy, but then also a tetheredness simply. So, I feel like I was really like the coloring and stuff, something that might seem kind of more abstract really just built back in a coherency for me, and I think the fact that the parts are so distinguished from each other actually plays into coherency, because then it gets down to just how each room is read, not something in its entirety and then completely indifferent to the way it is on the inside or at a different, smaller scale. So this is just addressing something at a smaller scale than maybe you're used to, where in its entirety, it kind of just has a very loose totality that doesn't necessarily have any agenda.
Did you think about outdoor furniture and stuff like that? For example, if you scramble up the gardens and where's the letterbox, where's trash cans? I mean, they're really banal questions, but it seems to me that they're part of the, you know, part of the project in a way? Like, where's the front door? I mean, do you care about those things, you know, or like the swing set or the trampoline, or, I mean, you know, the fire pit, I don't know, like all of that. So, because you go to the effort of showing normative furniture on the inside, but what about the normative stuff one puts in the garden, the front garden, the back garden, the side yard, you know, all that? Did you think about that?
Well, are you saying, is there a kind of is there something to the project that suggests where the front garden is or the back? Is there something that, you know,
No, it's more, you know, when Ramiro was explaining this sort of mixing stuff up and distributing it in strange places in section. I'm just wondering, is it just the space you're thinking about, or all the junk that we tend to put in those places as well? You know, because the interior furniture is as important as the exterior stuff, no? Because also it's about expressing your identity and or also, you know, socializing, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, you know, I really thought, I kind of thought of this as, yeah, a kind of place for your own taste, as just kind of a new framework for all your different stuff, you know, whether, you know,
I think her question, if I'm interpreting it accurately, it's how specific did he get in terms of considering all of the things that would be included from front to back, side to side.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah, you know, that really played in, I guess that really played these diagrams. There's a lot of these do have to do with what's the kind of, you know, we thought about accessibility and access. So, you know, what are the typical plays between each site that do address these things that need to happen? Like, how do you drive on to the site? How do you go up into the project? I mean, what's the relationship from house to house based on privacy between tall and short, or the way they're arranged in the ground and shifted off from each other on the ground? You know, is that answering your question? I mean, I did try to retain certain conventions like driveway and, you know, or try to address those, to go at those. But it was tectonic, privacy, accessibility. You know, these were kind of my.
Well, I think maybe it's a way to push it further, right? I mean, I think like it's a fabulous concept. I mean, I'm really enamored by it, and I'm just, how could you really push this to the, you know, to number 11 on the dial? And I think, you know, really thinking about these small things like the letterbox and whatever goes in the garden, and, you know, or does it mean if you just have wild plants, you don't, that's enough? Like you shouldn't be contaminating it with swing sets, you know, like I guess I'm trying to figure out where you are.
Well, I would
those things. And then urging you maybe to like push it forward in a very precise, prescriptive way.
Right.
I think,
not just kind of
Andrew, there is a, for some reason, I think you have the assumption that, like, I know, the color palette that you use and the distribution of elements is abstract. I would argue against that, just because, I mean, I think there is a very strong design hand in there that is, I mean, that it's not abstract at all. I mean, it's not that then it's a, I mean, this is completely open to do whatever I want to do, because I think already the architecture, the way that you are organizing furniture inside, outside, the colors that you use, the materials that you use, I mean, that there is a strong decision making behind that. So to me, there's nothing abstract at all. I mean, if you look at what the artwork that I think it was, it's a French artist, Vincent Lamoureux, for the Bates Hotel on Sunset Boulevard, that basically he painted everything white. And that was actually his way to claim territory outside of the building, because he even painted the pantry white. So everything, I mean, everything like suffered the white stroke of the artist. So I'm wondering, I mean, then what I would say is that, I mean, that just the whiteness that was, I know, behind that, or the whitewash of the building, that's what already promoted not just a level or a high level of abstraction, but also a way to claim territory where you don't need a grid, you don't need like very defined material or physical edges. So in a way, I mean, when I look at your project and when Penelope is asking you about, okay, like the exterior furniture, and I mean, in a way, it's open to everything right now. And I guess, I mean, once it's so open, then that's when maybe we start to suspect, because I'm wondering then what is what are the parameters that the project is proposing in order to kind of accomplish whatever rules you are like planting or like trying to establish within the project. So that's why, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said. I mean, I think the project, I mean, the soul of the project is where it wants to be. I think, I mean, you undertook like a really important aspect and a really important theme. But I guess if I were you, I would just like try to reassess what you have done in terms of, I mean, like for now, like giving it maybe the push that it needs in order to actually be much more free. I mean, I think right now it's still too tied into the parameters that you created for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And which I mean, then that relates too easily to what the constraints of standard suburbia are. Right? That everything has to be the same, one thing right next to the other, there is a front, there is a back. I mean, you're already changing a lot of that, which I think, I mean, that's the really smart part of the project. So anyhow, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just a question of kind of reframing your narrative. For example, if it's because I think where you achieve the plausible deniability is at the urban scale, like at the scale of the plan, where I think you could ramp up your plausible deniability in terms of the architecture is to say, this is a house where you will not see a dormer. This is a house that has no room. Because when you think about what people, it's the part of the curb appeal is being able to see how many rooms are in that building from the roof profile, how many windows there are. I mean, there's a certain kind of legibility that relates to quantitate, the number of rooms, the number of times the roof steps and gables and all of that. Like this sort of this kind of repetition of the gable is nuts. But it's also tells a story about the size of the home. And I think if you were then to spin your narrative, no room, no gables, no dormers, like, no this, like take away all of those cliches from the rhetoric, then we understand, oh, of course, that's what to be the multiplication of planes. And there is no front and there's no back. So it could be, leave the justification of the project through process aside and then restage it in terms of the curb appeal language.
Yeah.
Good. Andrew, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And I think we can move to our last presentation of today. We have RAD. Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Andrew, may I just ask you to stop sharing your screen, or I can do it for you. Okay. RAD, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone's still awake after those 3 presentations, even though they were super lovely. And then let me start sharing my screen. So hi, my name is RAD MIKA, and this is Atelier Ego. So branding, marketing, and retail space have progressed as spaces of leisure since the invention of the Edwardian arcades and the evolution of flaneur into the contemporary mall walkers. The Christmas window fronts at Bergdorf's have become a recognized New York tradition. The organization of the department store like Nordstrom have become a familiar convention, and the iconic Tiffany blue box an object of social status. Reimagining this well-known public space and activity is crucial at this time. Big box stores and suburban malls have been crippling, while online retail hasn't been responding to opportunities to innovate in time of economic changes, and even in contemporary crises of social isolation, as stores resemble early stages of abandonment and the general public yearns to participate in public sphere. Retail space has the perfect opportunity to assimilate itself to a space that creates a new tension between a space and its user. In a time where high-end retail depends on brick and mortar stores to generate up to 85% of their profit, retail still needs to be rethought as a space of personalized consumption. Creating this experience borrows from the idea of haute couture, where garments are made to order, no two identical. The hybrid model of the physical and digital space is exemplified through a stripped down reappropriation of the space that has the ability to adapt to a new fashion as new fashion seasons change through a digital AR platform. So the way that the AR platform works is kind of building on the store displays and shelvings that are typically a node of a way to display objects. However, I'm like rethinking of them as a way to track and direct the new consumer within the space to create this highly personalized experience. So basically the AR trackers are the background of the space rather than the display. So the generic object that you kind of come in with range from coffee cans to plastic bags, to milk crates, to go containers. They don't really have any applique to it. And it's just generic, nothing run of the mill. And this is one kind of breakdown of how you would kind of go through the space. So you come in with your generic object, you kind of start exploring, maybe you start to discover new textures that you would want to apply to your generic object. And then the next part would be maybe different applique tones with the textures, as well as different hardwares. And then before you leave, you kind of assemble or configure this applique to your generic object, and you apply to it, which kind of transforms the object into an object of desire, and it kind of represents a souvenir of the space rather than a consumeristic object at that point. And then following this would be kind of, let's say, one of the generic objects transformed by going into the space. And then let's say you and a couple of friends go into the space, both at the same time. However, both of you might have completely different experiences due to this digital overlay on the physical. And you come out of it with two very different objects, even though you might have experienced the space at the same time. It's just highly, highly individualized per cycle. And the way it kind of works is that you come into the space to discover these new things that you could apply to the objects, and the applique at the end has a limited lifespan, which kind of forces you to come back into the store and experience the space yet again. But this time it would be reconfigured to a new, basically, level of the store for you to create, let's say, this version, then this version, this, and so on and so forth. And then the applique transforms the object of desire into the souvenir. And this would be a great time for the people that received packages from Atelier Ego to open them up, while the people that unfortunately didn't get the packages can look at the images of what would have been physically sent out. So it's this organic matter that you would kind of discover within the space that would transform the object into something that you like really wanted, not only because it's like a unique experience, but due to like the tectonic nature of it. So all these kind of samples started with me exploring like biomorphic materials that kind of explore the possibility of like blending like an epidermis with a leather or any like keratin matter as well. So these are also like the tones range from like ebony to navy all the way through olive. And then the material itself has the ability to kind of live in multiple states all at once. So rather, it could be a digitized version of it or a super architectural tectonic version where you kind of see the section and explore. And the way that I'm kind of like infiltrating the private space is through Snapchat. And Snapchat filters to kind of like entice you into coming into the store. So you're transforming or invading the private space into forcing you to like get out into the public space as well. And it kind of talks to not necessarily excluding just to like, let's say luxury shoppers or anything like that. It's I would say a little more democratic when it comes to that.
We can't hear the audio.
Is there sound, by the way?
No.
Oh, whoops. I'm so sorry. I would have to reshare my screen really quickly. So sorry about that.
Do you love to shop? You know what? You know what? What? I do. You do? I do too. And you know what? I like to go to stores. I want to touch it. You know what I mean? Okay. I'm like,
you're hands-on.
Yes, like Marie Kondo says to like, you know, like pick things up and see if you want them, and if it doesn't give you joy, get rid of it. Yeah. I'm the opposite. Okay. I want to pick up things that I don't even care about and just be like, what is it? Let me touch it and smell it, and then like, I don't want it.
Let me rub it all over my body.
Yeah.
So this kind of is created from a sense of like parafiction from what I've kind of observed of like contemporary life. So these are images of the Prada store on Rodeo Drive, as well as the Saint Laurent store right after the pandemic hit. So you can kind of see the empty space with only display cases and only shelving, as well as brands already kind of playing with the idea of like materiality by Hermes breeding their own crocodiles, as well as the like snake community on YouTube, where they start to design their own snakes by morphing different versions of them to create like this new like custom snake at that point. So the next step is basically custom skins or custom epidermis, and then the as well as campaigns made by Pussy Crew for Burberry earlier this spring, where it's no longer about the physical object, it's a physical object represented in a digital way, but you're still basically selling the physical at the end of the day. So this questions contemporary ideas of consumerism and defines an entirely new playing field for the game that successful luxury retails currently play. Creating this symbiosis of physical and digital generates a new architectural system that detaches the architecture from the building to activate the space. I will also be sharing a link in chat for the jury members to experience, or like the way that I would see, let's say, one level of the store. And this kind of works in conjunction to my background currently, where it kind of crosses the idea of physical and digital at the same time. And this is kind of just like the limitations of technology currently. I would love to experiment more as new versions of this could be possible. Thank you very much. Oh, and for the people that are on live stream, it's going to be atelierego.store, not .com.
Do you want to also share maybe a couple of pictures that we can see on the screen?
Yes, I can. I'll just pause the video at certain moments. So these are some of the close-ups of the physical model.
Is my headphone working or not working? Or there's silence, Rad?
Excuse me?
My headphones are not working or there's a lot of silence?
I think there's a lot of silence.
Yeah, there you go.
I can maybe start with like a question to open up the discussion. How do you see yourself in the project? Like, what is like your role in a way? Are you here the architect? Are you here one of the consumers, or do you see yourself as a sort of like art director, or do you see yourself as a fashion designer? Especially like now that you are like on a moment of transition where you are closing, and it might be more than one, of course, but you're kind of closing with a chapter like the university chapter, and you're gonna jump into a new experience. Where do you think you will
Honestly,
go, or you would like to go?
Honestly, I kind of see myself in almost like wearing every single hat as I can, just because, yeah, there's the side of me that kind of curates things, as well as a side of me that is purely design, but also at the end of the day, I'm also a consumer. So I'm not kind of excluding any particular role. And like beyond graduation and whatnot, I would love to almost kind of dive like deeper into almost every single possibility with this project.
Who would you approach with this premise or thesis? Would it be a fashion brand? Would it be a startup? Who, you know, I mean, we know each other. And
practically, yeah. I think practically speaking, large conglomerates like LVMH would be a great contender for that, just because of the budget that they possess. Like at the end of the day, they are the ones that have the potential to experiment with what retail could be. At least in like a much larger scale, where you could, there's almost some sense of like customizing within retail, like let's say Prada. Prada already has stations where you could customize your perfume, whether it be the ribbon, the box that comes with, the engraving, et cetera, et cetera. So the next step is kind of scaling it up and even transforming it into even a more personalized experience, whether it not only being customizing a perfume, it's customizing an entire experience within the store.
Yeah, because I mean, we'll talk about the project, but it makes me think about Ez Devlin, set designer who does Beyonce, Kanye West, all of that performance staged events. I guess what you're doing is like braiding together retail, commerce, entertainment, and I loved how you said souvenir of space, because you're creating a concept that is about mass customization. And we did a project in the past where we imagined that retail would become dissolved. I mean, now is a good example of that we're just buying from home. We don't need to leave the home. So how would brands like Nike or Burberry seduce us to leave the home? And would then retail become this place of worship, almost like the salesperson is the shaman of the experience, and it becomes this ceremony. So I guess what I'm interested in is your take on, or how you're disrupting or bringing together artificial intelligence, augmented reality, fashion, tactility. And I think it's a really important market to disrupt, because it's worth so much money. The fashion, I mean, the beauty market alone is worth, in America, I don't know what it is now, but like hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, I didn't catch the first part of that just because my AirPods died, and I was trying to figure that out for a hot sec. But with, let's say, like the Nike experience and whatnot, there's almost like this like instant gratification where it comes to shopping, where you kind of get the item right then and there, as opposed to online shopping where you kind of just like browse through the same website as everyone else, and that experience is not necessarily unique to you. Currently with shopping, you do, at least with like high-end retail, you do start to develop relationships with the sales associate, and that's how they like basically play the game currently, where they entice you to kind of buy more and more because you're friends with them, and like then they'll end up offering you a more like limited item, like a Birkin bag at the end of the day, as opposed to online shoppers that wouldn't be able to do that. If it's not offered on the website, so be it. And then it's almost like a performative aspect as well, because you go to Rodeo not to see but to be seen, and experience everything for yourself, as opposed to sitting in bed scrolling through a website. Maybe I will propose a question to the jury members. I'm kind of interested in your guys' connection with being a consumer and how that would translate into kind of connecting with the physical space of like a point of sale.
Rad, I think that maybe I won't answer your question. I just wanted to say that, you know, throughout all this summer, the models that you've done and the material investigations are amazing. I think that maybe there's some issues, or, you know, the jury is like trying to see where do they enter, because the portion of your thesis that you're talking about consumerism and what you're talking about, the actual retail experience, I think that's a different path. I do think that, and I really like how you set up your background and all the photographer, you know, images, and all the material studies and all that stuff. You know, I think that's the thesis. I think that trying to respond to, I do think you can respond to commerce in a different way, but I would say that the core of the thesis has to do with this kind of, you know, the flesh almost becoming a completely new material investigation. Maybe if you run another image, I think we're now in that, but you have some that are really close up. Yeah. And I also think that it's quite fantastic is that shift that you have from technology to nature, you know, like that kind of back and forth. You know, I'm in and out of different views, so I didn't hear your full presentation, but I mean, I think all of the studies are fantastic. You know, I think you know, this is where the thesis is. When I hear Prada, LVMH, you know, like, you know, whichever, like that side, I think that's a slightly different, you know, it somehow if it goes in a different direction.
Okay, then I would like to kind of like respond to that. The way that, or the reason why like that is brought up is just basically a mode of kind of attacking the way that like architecture currently is, because these material samples and the like organic nature to it kind of speaks to the temporality of this superficial layer of architecture. So it kind of is a metaphor for the, like, let's say the green screened chunks that are applied on the physical aspect of architecture. So that has the ability to kind of constantly change as opposed to being stagnant. And like with architecture as we know now, by the time you build a building, it may have been 2 or 3 years since the initial design. So by the time you go through construction documents, permitting, et cetera, your original idea might be even out of trend or what have you. This is kind of speeding up the process of, listen, let's make architecture this like weightless thing that could constantly evolve, that could adapt to each person. And each time you visit the same space, rather than you kind of seeing the space through like decoration.
You know, I wanted to say that when the school, it's maybe just been less than 2 years, sort of shifted over to say it's a school of architectural thinking, that it really opened a lot of territory that, you know, on one hand, you could say not enough people have taken it up, but you're taking it up. And I'm thinking that you're not so much the architect of a structure, although it's present here, but you're being the architect of an experience, and you're challenging a lot of issues that I think are really rooted in architectural discourse. The idea of customized mass production. If we were talking about the fabrication of mass-produced things that are architectural, we would all enter into that conversation, I think, with a bit of ease. If I can't comment on this, it's probably because I don't have the expertise about what the issues are in this particular realm. Does not mean I'm not interested in it. You know, so I can only maybe be anecdotal about things that just as an architect I'm interested in. So this idea of the ability to leverage technology to customize an experience, on one hand, it's a kind of a fake, because like the algorithm, it only takes you to things you already know, and it keeps reinforcing it because it keeps learning about you. At some level, it's reducing you down to a sort of pro forma that maybe you say, no, you know, I'd like to do something different, but it won't let me. That's maybe a downside in the technology deployed about in the name of choice and difference. But I was just going to anecdotally relate that something that was so analog that I was so fascinated as an architect by was, I had seen quite a number of years ago an exhibition of Miyake's, you know, a kind of entire career exhibition at the major museum in Tokyo, and it was so interesting to me at one moment where they were showing this line that you probably know about, I didn't, which was called A Piece of Cloth, and you know, it was a kind of clothing that came on a giant roll, and you had the option to sort of clip it where you wanted and even take it home. And if you cut it here, it became this kind of garment. If you cut it there, it became another kind of garment. A very almost crude way of saying, we didn't figure it all out for you. You're not just consuming a product, you're sort of partaking in the making of it. You have some choice here. And that whole idea of a limited choice in things at that moment seemed liberating, you know, at some level, that it wasn't about just off the rack as I think you're challenging. You know, I always wondered how I could bring that into architecture. I have not figured that out yet, because maybe it's such a kind of, you know, I think I said to Hernan that architectural thinking can move quickly, but architecture as a discipline is kind of the elephant in the forest, in the jungle. But I think it's really, I would encourage you to keep doing this. I mean, I think the fact that you're thinking about this in a much larger way is necessary, because it breaks out all the kind of across the specialization that can maybe, you know, put strangleholds on the way these things are done. And so the architect as someone who can kind of think across the grain to maybe redesign larger experiences and challenge how technology can be leveraged. I think it's really interesting.
I guess that was beautifully said. And I would say in terms of, so several things have been said. The difficulty to enter the problem, I think, is very present for all of us. It seems incredibly personal. So I'm trying to figure out how to get to be able to piece together the series of parts that you've given us. So you've talked about kind of experience design, and what's very difficult is for us to actually have that experience. And so it's difficult to kind of critique what you're doing relative to some experience you're generating, right? Because we're not actually physically experiencing it. And so then it goes through a series of products, these kind of customizable products or the objects of desire that you're describing. And we have to kind of buy into that those are desirable objects, right? That we as designers or as consumers in this case would go into a store and produce our own design and find that better than the store we went into originally. Because I mean, ultimately that's kind of the way I'm viewing it. You don't go into Prada to redesign Prada. You go into Prada because Prada has a very particular design aesthetic and agenda in the same way that Issey Miyake does. And you're there because of that agenda as opposed to how you're going to transform their agenda, right? That's the only reason you would go there. But then I see also this sketch fab space that you've generated. And so I've been playing around in that space, and this is another version of kind of an experience, but then I don't know kind of how to experience that because it's fairly neutral, right? And so I'm just kind of left with a ton of questions back to that question of how do I enter? You know, beyond kind of skin, there's another thing there, right? About skin and tactility and the human body within a space of experience. Now the skin is becoming a thing of augmentation. And so I can't piece it all together at the moment, I guess is what I would say. And that's the difficulty as a reviewer on the project, at least for me.
Yeah, I completely understand that. There's definitely a lot of moving parts within this project. I mean, to the comment of the Issey Miyake versus Prada, at the end of the day, there's like a preset number of things that you could buy at each store, right? And these tastemakers kind of tell you what you should be buying at the end of the day, whether it be like a navy suit versus a black suit. This is kind of doing a similar thing by providing you different versions of this superficial epidermis level for your things. It's just that you kind of, as a consumer, think you have this like limited or unlimited number of variations, and just like depends on like how many things you discover in the space, that's how many things you could apply, right? However, thinking about the side of the actual like fashion house, you do know the limitations of, let's say, creating 100, 200, 300 different samples. You kind of just pick and choose what you want to like provide to the masses, right? So that's kind of what I've been doing with the material samples. However, the experience, let's say, for the jury, there are quite a number of like limitations, not only due to like current technology, but also during to the like current circumstances. So there's like a limited amount of things that I could provide to kind of mimic this like future of retail, whether it be mimicking the like physical and digital overlay as my background, or the online store.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I think it's really exquisite range of objects. You know, I want to go back to something Florencia said which is kind of drawing a line between should one just discuss this on the terms of consumerism, or should one try and find a way to discuss it in terms of architecture, if I understood Florencia's earlier comment right. I'm more on the side of architecture too. And the one thing I find very interesting about the project is sort of instability of all the objects. Like, for example, when you show us the model space, I'm presuming that's some kind of model of the interior. Have I understood that right? Is that what that model is?
It kind of hints at what it could be.
That's fine. Because what I find interesting is that the model space is then constructed out of many of the samples that you would find in the store. So that model could be a model, but it could be also something you buy in the store, like it could be an object, right? So there's this sort of weird ambivalence between, is something a model or is something an object? I think that's really interesting. The other thing I'm thinking is very interesting is the way that all of your language is architectural in the objects. So for example, the braided hair, like readers' lines, right? We see walls of, like there was a vertical thing of hair also, I think. Like for me, that's registering as some kind of porous, like screen. In other words, all of the sensibilities that you're capturing in the objects deal with transparency, lines, volumes, voids, all of it. So I think it would be very easy to recast all of it simply as architecture, right? Because your vocabulary is architectural, but then at the same time, there are uneasy objects, model, sample, found. I don't know, but I think that's great. I guess I'm more interested in the disciplinary lessons from a material study like this than I am in its application. Like, why does it have to be geared toward a consumer model? Why not diagnose the qualities of what you've made and then, import that back into architectural culture?
I think my mistake was kind of prioritizing this consumer model rather than the architectural model, especially with this presentation, because I do see these objects and the material samples as elements of potential architecture, kind of like what you said. And that's kind of how it started. It became a thing or an applique that kind of is scaleless. Rather, it could be applied to a generic object to transform it into an object of desire, or apply it to a generic retail space to transform it into this like custom experience. So both scales, I guess, speak the same language with this applique. And that's kind of how I would tackle like the architectural conversation.
I guess the question is, why does the work have to be useful? Useful in the sense of consumable. Why can't its use be disciplinary? Or, I get this is, why does it have to be instantly put on the market? It's a thesis project. You're still in school. You've done beautiful work and you've made incredible things, and the qualities of some of these objects are just stunning. And I think, architecture could get more out of this than retail, in my opinion.
It might have been just a self-conscious thing of me transitioning from a university setting into post-grad, and kind of entering that space without And like this kind of bridges that for me, maybe like subconsciously.
It's almost oh, sorry. One last thing. It's almost like you had proposed a business model, but you know,
it did almost like validity to it.
Pardon?
I would explain it to give it more like validity to the reasoning of like why this entire system needs to exist in the first place. And I could see this type of like production of experiences applied in different types of program. I think that retail was the most obvious one and the easiest one to kind of let loose on, basically, and create this like new system of how things work.
I mean, I completely agree with what Penelope has said, in the sense that this is your opportunity to theorize and maybe be able to conceptualize maybe what these objects are and give them a place within the discipline of architecture. Yet, I mean, not necessarily challenging them so soon with a business model that I guess, I mean, it's still very smart of you and opportunistic of you to have conceived it. But I think that's something that, or let's say where you are right now, and I mean, knowing that that business model exists, maybe there is a way that you can bring to the retail, I mean, or retailing as a system, an idea of that has to do with the conceptualization of some of these objects, that maybe the objects that might derive from that disciplinary kind of argument are the ones that, I mean, maybe in the future might be part of that business model. But I don't believe that, I mean, that these particular set of elements or components are the ones that need to move into that so soon. I mean, what I think is great about your thesis, Rad, is the fact that, I mean, I think you have conceived, you have looked at everything with a really wide spectrum of options and possibilities. And I think that's actually, I mean, that's really important within, like especially at the level of your education, and when, especially now that you are transitioning into the outer world. But as Penelope was saying, I think this is also an opportunity to maybe look back and almost like back engineered what you have done, and then see how further you can take that, but within, the constraints of the discipline. So, I mean, you will definitely make more money selling, applying this business model right now and not later. But I think, I mean, it's really, I think, I mean, it's opportunity that you can take from where things are right now.
Yeah, I was on the midterm RAD, and I think I'm totally okay with the project as a kind of series of studies, and would agree with the comments of, I mean, sure, there's a part of me as the, architect with a capital A, like, okay, where's the, where is it? Like, how do I engage this? And it's clear that you chose to show us a kind of series of vignettes at different levels, whether it's the kind of overlay virtual, these kind of proto models that we could directly relate to a kind of architectural piece. And then I was thinking, I think it leads you to really challenging, what you set out to do, which was, I remember you showing the empty store, right? Which is the kind of dichotomy of retail. There's the stuff, and then there's the thing that holds the stuff, right? And of course, with venues with fashion and also with cosmetics, there's also a performance piece in the retail of testing, trying on, things like that are hybrids, right? And then I was thinking about like makeup trailers for movies or things like that, which are more workspaces with similar products, and that was kind of maybe what you were after. like you'd walk into someone's workshop and you wouldn't really think everything was for sale, right? Yet all the same stuff is there. And I think that's what you were kind of after, where the making of a thing or the remaking of a body in a way like maybe in an artist's studio would occur, is also mixed with retail. I think that's where it's kind of going in that model, and also linked with these kind of virtual kind of Pokemon Go opportunities of overlay and the digital and your website. So I wouldn't, I think you said the word mistake at one point. I wouldn't consider it a mistake. I think you could have been more conscious maybe and just said it will not be an architectural resolution. You know, it will lead to certain paths of which I'll pick up later and maybe even get paid for by someone, which would be great too. So I just wanted to mention that. I kind of had you checked. I wanted to visit your review, and it was great to listen to all the comments. So great job.
Thank you for that.
I wanted to, Russell, in the beginning, even Florencia saying, is the sound off because no one's talking? I think that sort of uneasiness I'm really interested in. And I guess I can only speak personally. I'm not an architect. I'm an artist, and I wrestle sometimes with the idea of like, where do I enter into a thesis around architecture, because I'm an artist, and what right do I have to talk about the curb because I don't have that background. But I love that this project is happening at SCI-Arc, and I think it makes complete sense for the school. That the Material Futures course at Central St Martin's in London, RAD, this would sit very comfortably in their repertoire of work. But I love that you're doing it here, and that you're like, you didn't know how to use a sewing machine until 12 months ago, and now you're sewing and you're buying hair and you're buying leathers and you're buying hardwares for handbags and turning them into architectural details. So I think that I just want to congratulate you on knowing how hard it is to make something physically without knowing what it's going to look like in the end. And I guess I'm curious also to know how much of this process of making informed the idea, because I think that's interesting as a creative process. Can we create narratives or challenge theoretical concepts through the making of physical objects without knowing where that's going to take us?
And I guess, I mean, just following up on that, Rad, I appreciate tremendously the originality of your project. I mean, I think this is something I'm not used to see, I mean, very often in reviews, and the passion that you have put into the work. I mean, I think it sounds that you had so much fun doing this. And I think this is, I mean, how better can it get when this is something that, I mean, it's not just opening the doors for many different paths that you might want to follow in the future, but also, I mean, you had the time of your life. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerated. I'm not, I don't know exactly how it was, but maybe, I mean, just even seeing the way that you curated your background. Like I was going to ask, I mean, are those pieces that, I mean, what is that? I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of the discussion in the beginning, but I think there is a, I mean, you are so committed to this. And I mean, I think that also actually, validates the work that we as teachers, produce throughout the, the encounter that we have with the students. So, I mean, really congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to follow on that comment on the passion that RAD had this entire semester. Because as his instructor, it has been, just amazing seeing within like the context we are, and having him like working mainly with physical models, and we were communicating every time through through a screen where like all of his models were like about, oh, you can squeeze it, you can stretch it, it's soft, it's hard, it's this and that. And still like his like dedication in like taking the risk of going against every sort of conventional way of presenting his thesis. I remember we had this conversation at the beginning. He was like, but should I do plans and sections of this? And I'm like, Rad, your project, I don't think is about that at all. Like you can forget about those. So I really just like want to congratulate with you for like really like pushing as much as you could, and like thank you for trying every time something different, something like kind of like extraordinary, and for being so dedicated to what you're doing. So with that, thank you so much everyone for being here today. Thank you for all of your amazing input, ideas, comments. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the students. Congratulations for completing your SCI-Arc experience. I'm just gonna share, and
thank you guys. Yeah,
to the advisors as well. So congratulations, Florencia. Thank you for your coordination as well.
Martin, Penelope, Georgina, Russell. Who am I missing? Lucy, and John. I see Sean there. So thank you guys for joining us. We know that Zoom can sometimes be quite demanding. I see Penelope is getting dark for you. I know Martin also is probably dark because you guys are the East Siders. Center East. We are the West, even though the sky is quite dark right now in our California state. So yeah, so this was was great. You guys, Andrew, I didn't see your presentation. I'm sure it was great. Sherry, where are you? Rad. Don't trust anybody. I missed part of the presentation, but if you look at the earlier models of everybody, Wolf Briggs, look at the earlier models, Zaha Hadid, look at earlier. I mean, and you'll see everybody had some kind of strange model. Maybe this was mentioned, but I don't think that it's like this is before, after architecture or not. I mean, I totally see big, buildings with huge floor plans in the future. So yeah, so thank you everybody. We have at 6 o'clock, if you want to join, I'm sure some of you are tired. We're going to cheers. We're doing this every night after we finish. It's going to be mostly music and cheers. So it's a party with no words, with only music.
It's a silence party.
It's a music party.
Yeah, we can keep just the headphones on as we do always. I just dropped the Zoom link in the chat for that.
Okay.
Great. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Congrats to the students.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Congratulations, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.